Okay. Hi, Eric. Hi, Bill. You guys seeing my screen?
Yep.
Great. How are you doing today? All good?
Doing well.
Yeah, doing great. It's sunny here in Boston and the rain's gone, so pleasant.
Well, sounds like a real treat. Yeah. So welcome everybody to the webinar. We have here today Eric Tailor, Senior Director R&D Surgical Robotics at Medtronic, and also Bill Piney, who I believe is Senior Director of R&D, or rather of systems architecture at Medtronic. And we'll get started in just a minute or two. We're doing something fairly unusual for our webinar today. Instead of inviting lecturers from academia or from RSIP, we're going to have sort of a more open-ended fireside chat. Yeah, both Eric and Bill have been in this business for longer than I have, for sure, and for a long time. And it'll be, I think, great to hear about their thoughts on where medical robotics and surgical robotics are going, how AI ties into that, and so forth. So, yeah, thanks everybody who's joining and continuing to join as we speak. Great attendance today at this webinar. I think we'll give everybody just 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we'll get started.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so while we're waiting, I'll give the usual background. So we're RSIP Vision. We develop visual intelligence technologies, AI and computer vision solutions, software solutions for medical imaging. We work with the medtech industry. Some of our solutions are for planning of surgical procedures, such as orthopedic surgery, intra-procedure guidance, like measurements during surgery, or measurements of measurements in ultrasound scans, and also analytics. So taking all this data that's being pulled in from the OR or from medical imaging in the planning situation, and using that to eventually build a better understanding and bring all the knowledge, accumulated knowledge of thousands of surgeons to help improve patient care and make healthcare more efficient and more beneficial to all. Our solutions are deployed in medical devices and been used in thousands of clinical procedures with the medtech industry. Yeah, and today our guests are from Medtronic, leading various R&D activities in the surgical robotics field. So yeah, just some background. So maybe Eric and then Bill. So we'll start with Eric. Maybe tell me a bit about your personal path and your career path and your current role at Medtronic and how you got there.
Sure. So I've been in the medical device industry for about 20 years, most of which has been with actually starting with Tyco Healthcare through Covidien and now Medtronic. Spent the kind of first half working on minimally invasive surgical technology, everything from laparoscopic instruments, stapling, access instruments, to some of the endoluminal and notes technologies that we're working on. And then right around, I guess, 2011, 2012, I got involved with some early work at Covidien at the time to kind of enter into this robotics space, and have been part of what is now our Hugo organization since 2012 formally. Today I lead the portfolio of R&D work for robotic systems and robotic instruments. And pleased to actually invite Bill to join me today, kind of last minute this morning. But Bill and I have worked together pretty much since the beginning of the program, and have both carried big parts of this program forward over the years. And pleased to invite Bill to join me here.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate Eric inviting me in. And my background is similar to Eric's. We have a lot of common experiences, but took a different path to get to the same point. I've been involved in some way with surgical robotics since feels like the beginning, early 90s, and my PhD was related to haptics and bringing that sense of technology into laparoscopic instruments, and so was connected into the surgical robotics community through computer motion and the early stages with IBM and Russ Taylor, and been at several startup companies, 3 of which have developed surgical robotics. I also did a stint in academia where I was a professor at Purdue in mechanical engineering, and my research area was in surgical robotics and haptics. And joined the program in 2013, and had three main jobs during my tenure here at Covidien and Medtronic. I led the team that developed the surgeon console. In the first 4 years, started a controls team, so some software centric aspects, and then now I'm leading the systems team. And about to step into a new role, looking at sort of the strategic direction of the whole company relative to surgical robotics. So it's a topic near and dear to my heart, and I think Medtronic has a great opportunity to become a leader in this space. So excited to talk with all of you.
So you're both originally, at least from engineering backgrounds. How's that experience of going from being a mechanical engineer and doing R&D and building the system, and then going from there to these more sort of management roles and strategic roles? How does that feel? Is it interesting? Which aspects did you enjoy most during that career path? I'm sort of curious about that.
Do you want to take it first?
Yeah, I mean, it's a transition, right? It's never easy to go from being, like first you start out, you're building something and you do everything yourself, right? And it's within your control. And then you start to have people help you with projects and relinquishing small tasks. And then you start to manage a team and deal with that dynamic. I think Eric and I are at the point now where we're managing managers, and we're pretty far from some of the technical aspects at times. And there's a letting go process that happens. But a phrase that I really like, a book that I read that inspired me, it's called collective genius. And as a manager, I think it's your goal to inspire others, to harness the entire team to solve the problems. That's how you really solve the most interesting and challenging problems. So it's hard transition, but I think it allows you to do some pretty amazing things once you can do that.
It is, once you can appreciate it. I mean, it's definitely a challenge, right? All of us, both of us came up early in our career designing, leading, and as your role grows, it takes you a little while to realize that your ability to actually get things done at a larger scale has a much bigger impact, and in a lot of ways challenges some of those fundamental skills and understanding you have of what you thought you needed to do to be successful. And I don't know, I think it's been a growth opportunity for all of us. And I guess we probably both in certain areas still hold on to things that we feel very passionate about in terms of our desire to be close and understand the fundamentals of design, but I also think that shapes us into who we are as leaders. So
yeah, I love that definition. So the way to get great things done is actually to let go, right? So to let the whole team sort of unleash their power, which is way more than one person could ever do or control or get into all the details of themselves. So so this is more. I mean, this discussion is more to sort of talk about surgical robotics in general, but nevertheless, you're both deeply involved in Medtronic. So you guys have had some big announcements over the past year or so from Hugo, right? So the CE mark and first cases in Europe. So fill us in a bit to the degree that you're able to share. What's the latest on the Hugo robot news updates?
Yeah, I would say, latest is we are still continuing to grow, and right now we're in the process of scaling manufacturing and hopefully nearing the start of our IDE and focused on urology in the US and just really, continuing to grow the base of surgeons who are trained in our technology and continuing to, make improvements, drive investment, and grow this organization, this program. So, it's an exciting time, and for those who've been around product development, it's a lot of work to get there. Sometimes it's even more work afterwards to keep things going. So we're in that stage, and it's exciting and insanely busy, but we are looking forward to the coming months and years here as we continue to grow and expand.
So really the revving up the boots on the ground stage of the product after this long map.
It's a big transition, right? Going from making that first prototype, and I can remember years ago, what it took to get us to the point where we were testing in the lab and doing, full functional tests with our first robot to get to the point where we can make, tens, hundreds, hopefully thousands, and it's an exciting transition and it's great to see, but it's a ton of work along the way. So
Mhm.
And we're constantly learning. I think that's another part is you think you understand your product really well, then you launch it and you learn new things every day. And I think we did a really good job in architecting the system to be very safe and effective. And what we're really working on now is scaling, right? Being able to have more users, more connectivity, and more reliability, and just expand the capabilities of our system.
Mhm. That's super interesting, because that narrative about, we're understanding our product, that's usually something, you hear from startups at earlier stages. But it's interesting that even though you're already in the, the super scale up stage of this roadmap, and you're still saying, yeah, well, as we scale up, we're learning more, and we're understanding our product more, and how we actually bring it into the market. So,
and I think an important piece of that is the Hugo system is a teleoperated. We call it Hugo because it's a person's name, because it's part of the OR team, and there's a dynamic of working with people that you can't always predict with equations, with testing and things like that. And so I think just as our population of users grows, that's where our learnings are coming from.
Very interesting. So so Medtronic has taken on a big task, right? So building a general purpose, large footprint, high price robot, and breaking into a market that's been controlled by others for so long. What are your thoughts on sort of the future of surgical robotics, right? Are these big abdominal robots, first the Intuitive one, and now Hugo, and probably a few more down the road, going to dominate the market, or is there room for a smaller footprint, lower price, task-specific robots, more specialized system? Where do you see sort of the play between those two different approaches?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll take the first wagon. Feel free to jump
Yep.
in. But I think what you'll see is continued growth with general purpose, general surgery, general thoracic surgery, robotic systems. I mean, you see it, right? How many new companies every year spring up in this space? But I do also think there are a lot of kind of niche applications that a general purpose robot maybe isn't as acceptable for. I mean, you certainly see different families of robotic technology being applied to different areas of surgery today. And I think when you start getting in, yes, you definitely will start to see more and more, I guess, expansion of, and we say robots, right? But at the end of the day, right, it's more capable surgical technology being applied to different procedural specialties in different ways. I think there are general commonalities that you may see between different ones, but it goes back. Bill and I had a discussion this morning on the definition of a robot. And I told my man, I think in 10 years we're not talking about robots as standalones, right? Robots are, in my mind, sort of the foundation that procedural technology and procedural evolution will be built on in the future, right? As we start to bring in new capabilities that enhance the baseline at which surgery is performed. And at the end of the day, right, all these technologies are being brought to the market, to the operating room, to help improve the care of the patient. The robot is just a foundational piece that helps enable a lot of other things above and beyond that. And as you start to look at some of these specialties, right, they dictate very different technologies, applications, form factors, use cases that will drive different architectures and maybe, in some very unique areas, very different robots than we would think of today. So sorry, I know I kind of wandered there, but
No, you didn't at all. It's a big question, and it's a complex answer. And I think if you look at Medtronic and what we have expertise in many ways we have a right to win in robotics. When you start to look at the expansion beyond the Hugo robot and you look at the endoluminal applications, you can quickly see robotics for lung is already here, and some of our competitors are there. But we have a leg up on some of the sensing capabilities and the treatment capabilities there. Adding robotics will bolster us. But then you look to cardiovascular applications, putting in artificial valves, either through TAVR or the mitral valve we're heading toward. putting in pacemakers. Our micro device is able to be deployed through the vasculature, and being able to put that exactly in the right point in the heart is difficult to do, and surgeons are trying to control multiple degrees of freedom through these catheters. And some level of automation, call it a robot if you want, but it's really simplifying a complex procedure into something that's very instinctive, right, to understand. And same thing happens with a Hugo robot. It takes 6 degrees of freedom. You're manipulating complex tools. We make it a very simple user interface with a hand-eye coordination, with 3D visualization. So that, to me, is why you need to bring robotics into these endoluminal applications. It's going to simplify the procedure so you can do it very precisely, consistently, and it's incredibly valuable to the patients, right? Because you're doing things in the least invasive way possible.
Yeah, and the cognitive load doesn't make it so difficult to do that only the most skilled surgeons can do it, right? I mean, I remember back in the 2007-8 timeframe, we were developing endoluminal technology, and the cognitive load trying to run a bunch of manual, flexible endoscopic devices along with a GI endoscope, just becomes so cumbersome and manually difficult that only the most skilled surgeons are proficient at it. And it became very hard to drive more widespread adoption, let alone advanced procedures and do things that are more complex. So, it's a foundation to build on.
It is. And I think it's also, robotics is kind of a beachhead into the operating room or the endoscopy suite. And once you have a robot there, there's a lot you can do with the automation capabilities, with the integration with navigation and imaging, and then starting to lead towards some autonomy in terms of specific tasks or parts of a procedure. So the robot is, you need to define a clear value to get it in the door, but once it's there, I think it's going to just expand the capabilities immensely.
So basically, we're talking about a way wider definition of a surgical robot than just something that's like a Hugo or like a smaller version of Hugo. It's sort of any automated tool that reduces the cognitive load on the surgeon, that simplifies the procedure. It can be a Hugo manipulating wristed instruments, and it can be a system that makes it easier to manipulate a catheter through the vasculature and stabilize that. That's also robotic. So
it could be an intelligent handheld device that's providing feedback, guidance, information that helps you, the surgeon, perform better surgery, right? Improve the efficacy or efficiency of a procedure. I mean, I think there's a lot of permutations, and I think that was the point, right? The robot, the way we think about it today, I don't know. I don't think will be, something that we define the same way in 10 years.
Mm-hmm. So we'll pivot a bit to the field that's close to my heart, which is AI and computer vision. So how do you guys see it from your vantage point, right? As you said, you're thinking first and foremost of the surgeons and of the patients, right, and of the use case and of the application, and then thinking, okay, what technology do we need to bring to bear to make this procedure easier or more effective or safer? So how do you see the role of AI in surgical robotics? Where are the strongest opportunities? What would the first application be on the wish list, right, of bringing things into clinical practice? Choose your level of detail, but
I'm like kind of in the back of my mind thinking about where and how to kind of proceed with that question. I mean, it's a great question, right? And there are a lot of ways to kind of answer it.
Yeah.
I
think one place that I would start is maybe what we've already got on the market, which is digital surgery, and what they've done. It's not, they're not releasing an intelligent assistant that replaces a surgeon. What they've done to start with is take endoscopic video and be able to automatically process where you are in the procedure, what step or phase or tasks you're on, and link that to preoperative training. And I think even that level of sort of recognition of steps has a tremendous value, right? And being able to do that in the operating room. Once you start to do that, then you can start to allow surgeons to, after the procedure, say, hey, show me what was going on when I was suturing that or doing that anastomosis, rather than having a VHS tape, which they have a lot in their office, and scanning, when was it? No, they can quickly just jump to that immediately. or they can start to see trends between cases and say, boy, you know, this particular case, I took like 3 times longer when I was doing the stapling. Why was that? Let me look at that. You can start to look for trends. You can start to look for trends between surgeons, between hospitals. So I think there's a lot that we can provide even with what we've got today.
Yeah, and I think it's about helping establish also metrics and tools to help drive kind of standard of care in a lot of situations, right? You know, that I think it gives you a lot of tools that can help you both inform and guide, and then, you know, eventually intraoperatively potentially, maybe not necessarily intervene, but warn an alarm, you know, in certain situations where maybe somebody is deviating from what best practice is. And you know, I think a big piece of that is the aggregation, collection of the data in a way that allows you to kind of compare, contrast, and also combine kind of some of the information that you get maybe intraoperatively with postoperative outcomes, and making sure that there's, you know, opportunities to drive correlations and help drive some of the development of what those standards of care need to be in the approaches. And I think just it's another tool in the toolbox to help maybe standardize the approach, help increase how quick and you know, how dramatic the learning curve is to any new clinician coming into a space. And you know, there's just a lot of opportunities like that.
So it sounds like this kind of, you know, offline analytics applications is really kind of a sweet spot for introducing AI, right? And digital surgery, obviously, you know, the big acquisition by Medtronic, but then there are other players in the industry doing or trying to do something similar. So it sounds like a sweet spot because on the one hand, right, you don't need to jump over all the technological hurdles you would need to in a intraoperative application, right? It doesn't need to be running in real time, and probably the regulatory burden and the safety issues and the questions raised are much lower, right? Because this is a training tool, an analytics tool. It's running offline. So on the one hand, it's easier to get there, you know, technologically and maybe from the regulatory standpoint. And then on the other hand, it's bringing a clear value, right? This gives surgeons something they're interested in looking at, and that helps them become better surgeons. And it gets you sort of your beachhead, as Bill was saying earlier, I think, into the OR. It gets you a way of accessing more and more data. What about intraop? Like intraop, these are sort of, right, this is scarier, more challenging. What would the first thing? I mean, there are companies who are showcasing all kinds of proof of concepts, and there's been a ton of research on so many applications. Where do you think the first step is going to be there? Not necessarily for Medtronic, but just, you know, in general for surgical robotics, or maybe not even for robotics, right? You have companies that are not robotics companies at all who are also striving to offer real-time AI to the OR.
I think it's just an extension of what you just said, right? If digital surgery is able to do that offline, let's bring that capability to be intraoperative. And then it starts to be, provide what Eric was talking about. You forgot to pressure test the vessel after you sealed it. You know, just like a navigation system in your car, it knows where you're going and it tells you which way to turn. Or if you make a wrong turn, it gets you back on track.
But you know, that's right. The closest analogy, right, to not go too far into, you know, things that are close to our heart internally. But I mean, you think about the analogy of how the evolution you're seeing in cars, right? You know, it's a lot of technology that helps ensure that you're staying in your lane, doing, you know, you're not going to crash the car. You're not going to make a mistake, you know, user-based mistake, you know, in using, you know, a lot of different sensors and technology to help ensure that the surgeon has, you know, all of the information and where and when, you know, the system is registering a potential risk, you know, alerting the user. And I think those are some of the more near-term applications. And I do think you'll probably see similar evolution where there's little bits and pieces that are maybe assistive. And I think you'll see a lot of technology starting to look at ways to augment the capability of the surgeon in real time, you know, start to come in before you see any larger automation of major steps or sequences in a procedure.
And recognizing critical structures or providing guidance of saying, hey, you know, I know you're doing a cholecystectomy and you got to isolate the cystic duct and the cystic artery, and hey, I see it, right? And even just that confirmation that you see both, people usually make the right.
So sort of this is a kind of a driver assist or an ADAS, but unlike I think in the automotive world, so the automotive world, they started, I mean, technologically with sort of detecting fairly straightforward or low-level features, right? If you think of a lane departure warning, right?
Yep.
So it's very difficult to build an AI that actually robustly detects the lines on the road. But on the other hand, this is still a fairly low-level feature, or a blind spot warning, right? So in the end, technologically, you need to detect cars. If you detect cars in a certain field of view of a camera, you solve the problem. And here, for the first steps that we're discussing here for surgical AI, right? This is identifying way more complex events, right? Identifying stages of a surgery, or identifying the presence of certain anatomical structures, or a certain configuration of anatomy. That's sort of a way more complex problem. Just thinking of it like from the point of view of a computer vision engineer. Of course, we know that with enough data, AI gets this done, and that it's much easier than in the past. But nevertheless, this is sort of a higher hurdle to pass than what the automotive industry, I think, was first trying to introduce.
It is, but I mean, look, even just in, a little bit of an adjacency to where we are, but I mean, look at the ultrasound space, right? And the evolution that you're seeing in, helping clinicians interpret and understand what they're seeing, from an ultrasound image. Improving detection through, a lot of advanced data analytics that are sitting behind this, helping, interpret and at least present the data in a way that standardizes a little bit more, I think is sort of along the lines of what I think Bill was getting at with, potentially, recognizing anatomy and identifying, go, no-go areas. There's a lot of opportunities there.
Mm-hmm. And what about data availability, right? So all this technology takes data, right? I mean, it's all data driven. How do you see this problem being solved by the industry, if at all, right? It's sort of, the data is kind of siloed, and everybody's competing to get access and to get a real estate in this data world. Is there another way to do this, right? Is there potentially some way of having some kind of shared database, or some sort of collaboration with the academic world, or are we stuck with sort of this siloed environment like we're seeing today?
It's a tough question, right? I don't
know. I mean, and the question I have is, what's the role of the surgical societies? Could they come in and start to facilitate that? Because it's in everyone's best interest that we get access to the data and we start to develop these advanced algorithms. So, but obviously, patient privacy is paramount, and we can't neglect that. I think it's a tough question, right? And it's an evolving story.
Yeah, I mean, and it starts with making sure that there's universal security of the data, and then looking at, I mean, there's just so many challenges, whether they're regulatory, legal, I mean, geographic challenges. I mean, there's a lot of problems to be solved, and I think to your point, right, it's going to take somebody leading the charge, maybe in a spot like one of the societies, right, where they benefit from the outcome of the data and don't necessarily have anything invested in the in the aggregation and implementation of what's done with the data.
So the surgeons, and in the end the patients, are the stakeholder whose interest is that there's enough data to really build up these technologies and to be the fuel for getting these capabilities. Mm-hmm. So okay, so pivot a bit to the topic of use cases and applications for surgical robotics. So I'll share real quickly. So sorry about that. So this was shared with us by Roger Smith. So this is a landscape of the currently available or currently under development robotic surgery platforms, right? 110 companies, specialties across all of almost any medical application and any part of anatomy one can think about, right? So we have abdomen, we have orthopedic, spine, knee, hip, etc. Which clinical fields benefit the most, do you think, from robotic assisted surgery, and why? And I guess we can start with I guess in the soft tissue world, but I'm interested in hearing your thoughts actually beyond that world as well. So which procedures, which medical fields do you think will actually benefit the most from robotics?
I mean, it's hard to argue that laparoscopic surgery and thoracoscopic surgery benefits the most. It's because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. today, right? And and thousands and thousands of patients are served every day using surgical robotics. So clearly, there's a very compelling business case and clinical benefit that's demonstrated there.
Yeah, but it's how do you measure the benefit, right? Whether is it financial opportunity, is it impact to the clinical outcome, and you could argue. I mean, there's a lot of procedures and specialties in there, right, where some of the operations maybe have high comorbidity rates, or are very difficult to use. They're specialized, and I think if you look at benefit as I guess an artifact of the risk and I don't know, I guess difficulty or challenges some of these procedures, you could almost make an argument for a lot of different focus areas. It's hard to say, right? I mean, we focus so much of our effort in soft tissue spaces, that are kind of near and dear to Medtronic in our business. But you could look at a lot of those other spaces, and there's very good reasons that there are investment going into all those different procedural specialties, because there's a need there. And I think each need is different and unique, but I think if you factor in the the opportunity, right, there's certainly a lot of procedures that fall under the kind of laparoscopic umbrella. But there's also plenty of very unique, you look at the the eyes and the microsurgery work. There's some very tangible benefits that come out of improving dexterity and control, and adding more intelligence to some of the technology that enable better outcomes. So I don't know. It's my best non-answer.
Yeah, I think a lot of what drives it is becoming more and more minimally invasive. So the reason Intuitive had so much success in the early 2000s was because of prostatectomies, where it was very difficult to do that with standard lap tools, laparoscopic tools. But because you were working deep in the pelvic region, all the instruments were coming in, you just didn't have much dexterity. So, probably 5% of the surgeons were able to do it laparoscopically. Comes the robot, now 95% of those procedures are done laparoscopically. That's a huge benefit to the patient, less time in the hospital, fewer infections. And you're seeing the exact same thing as we move toward other endoluminal applications. Go back to that. Why have a lung robot? Well, if you can not only diagnose whether a tumor that shows up in a CT scan is cancerous, but then be able to treat it in an endoluminal fashion, versus splitting the sternum, getting in access, going through the ribs. It's very invasive. So from a patient's perspective, it's so much better to move to minimally invasive. Go to other endoluminal applications in the GI, being able to, again, it's an outpatient procedure versus an overnight stay or multi-night stay. And you're starting to see this even in other areas. I'd say another reason I would say why robotics that I'm seeing for is it's just kind of a different case in neurology. For neurovascular robotics, the telesurgery aspect, where you can have the surgeon in one location and the patient in a different part of the city, for example, becomes important for those applications, because the time between when a stroke occurs and when treatment happens is very critical to brain health. And so that's a case where the robot provides a speed advantage, right?
So basically, accessibility is not only making things easier or making it easier for lesser trained surgeons to perform a minimally invasive procedure using a robot rather than without robotics, but actually accessibility means better quality of care for everybody, right? I guess the stroke example is the most compelling one, right? So to drive adoption, right, is it necessary to prove that a robotic-assisted prostatectomy is more effective than a laparoscopic prostatectomy, or is it enough that robotic assistance makes it possible for way more surgeons to well perform a minimally invasive prostatectomy? That's enough, and that's a clear clinical benefit. Even if you go head-to-head between a robotic and non-robotic procedure with an expert surgeon, maybe they're equivalent. Maybe you can't prove that they're any better clinically, right? But the very fact that more surgeons can now perform this procedure, that sounds like a tangible benefit in itself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Before we continue, just a word to the audience. So please feel free, anybody who would like to type in any questions for Eric or for Bill, now's the time to do it. We'll be chatting another few minutes, and then we can take questions from the audience as well. Yeah, please feel free to share questions. I see there are a few people who've already put some in. Yeah, now's the time. Yeah, so a follow-on question about the use cases and specific, types of surgery. So in the orthopedic field, right? So Medtronic is in spine and it's not in joint replacement. But any thoughts there on where surgical robotics are or are going to, be beneficial to patients? Spine versus, knee and hip replacement, because there's a activity in both of these fields and bunch of solutions out there, very strong investment, etc.
Yeah, I think in spine, clearly you can have a very detailed map of a patient from a CT image set, all the slices, create a three-dimensional model, know how you want to affect, do reconstructive surgery of the spine, and then the robot helps you execute that with great precision during the procedure. So you register the robot, accurately position relative to the patient. So you map out exactly where all the vertebral bodies are, and then be able to place very carefully and precisely drill holes for implants. So that one, it's about translating a preoperative plan into the intraop and being able to execute it very, very well. I think the same thing is going to be true like with our stealth auto guide system, where you're starting to do brain surgery. Again, you've got a stereotactic frame, where the anatomy is because of preoperative imaging, and now you want to execute during the procedure. And so it's there, a lot of the soft tissue robots are about teleoperation, the dexterity, the range of motion. The spine robots, the neural robots are about accuracy and very careful control, because you're working close to very, very critical structures.
They are. And today, most of those robots act as positioning guides, right? I think if you look at maybe where the evolution could go or may go, right, it's even taking it one step further and being more interventional in nature, and I think today, this is where, you look at the types of robots. What we do with the teleoperative system and how we even just specify what's important for that system, it's very different than I think what you would look to specify if we were developing, something that worked on bone somewhere. For us, things like latency and responsiveness of, input to output controls are probably more critical than the accuracy of a, registration between the base coordinate system of the robot and where the end effector is, and how you can register that with the CT image in the patient. So, I think as, with all of these, as you look at future evolution, you look at pain points today or challenges today, and, a lot of them, potentially if you look at the comparison between how it's done manually and the way it's done robotically today, there are a lot of steps, right? It's about getting the robot in the right position to be effective. It's registering, in these orthopedic-based solutions, right? It's registering the patient to the robot itself so that you can be accurate and precise. There's probably a lot of potential directions in which some of those complications or challenges in the setup become easier and more efficient as some of these technologies evolve, especially as the size of the robots shrink, the actuators themselves, and the backbone of these systems get smaller, lighter, and easier to manipulate. Then I think it's about how do you also help not just the surgeon intraoperatively, but how do you help the whole operating room ecosystem make it more efficient to bring in, bring out, set up, tear down, and I think you then start having a natural evolution to discuss, cost impacts and making sure that, robotics is both providing benefit to the clinician as well as the hospital, both, clinically and economically as well.
Yeah. I think you're going to see additional application areas where, again, very precise positioning is needed. For example, one of our business units is neuromodulation, and they're starting to use that. We already have products on the market now that treat Parkinson's, and those are amazing stories to hear. To have someone who just can't function, and all of a sudden it's like you brought them back, and it's very inspiring. but we're still learning about how the brain functions, and being able to accurately place electrodes at specific points within the brain. Robotics can help with that. And I think you're going to see over the next 10, 20 years amazing advancements of what neuromodulation is able to help improve our health. There's so much that goes on between the brain and the body.
Just out of curiosity, right, in the DBS application, Parkinson's, has there been, I mean, are the surgeons today or the planners today able to say that they want to hit a certain very precise location in the basal ganglia? Is there such precise navigation involved as opposed to just, hitting the right structure in the brain? Do we know today where precisely the stimulation should be applied in order to get a good result?
So I think you've gone beyond the realm of Eric and I's expertise. But
I was waiting for you to handle that one.
but I have seen some of these the catheter devices that are implanted into the patient's brain, and oftentimes they have multiple electrodes during a small length of the distal end of the device. But they'll have different regions, and then they use software to direct the energy in the correct location. So they basically build in functionality of the product to allow for more imprecise placement, if you will. But again, as you go forward and being able to very carefully and accurately hit a specific spot in the brain, treatment will be better and more powerful, and even more types of conditions will be able to be treated.
Yeah, and one could hope that the more of these precisely guided procedures are done, and the more data is collected, hopefully, eventually, that will help us learn more about, what the positioning actually should be. You mentioned telerobotics. What do you think the timeline is for that? I mean, not in terms of in the OR sitting at the surgeon console and having the robot next to you performing surgery, but actual remote telerobotics. How close are we to that becoming a reality in your view?
Well, I think it's becoming a reality and becoming, something that's commonly practiced. I don't know. I mean, it feels like there's still some infrastructure hurdles that need to be resolved that are maybe outside of our control at this point to a degree. We've certainly seen people do minimally invasive robotic surgery, remotely, in a few test cases. But I do think, it's sort of an infrastructure question that maybe will be a predecessor towards, answering that question of when you'll start to see more widespread adoption. I do think you'll see bridges, though, where you'll see more active participation remotely, potentially even, proctoring, mentoring, those kinds of applications that I think will become more widespread the more these systems proliferate operating rooms around the world. And I think to a degree that will be a bridge, and based on, adoption, engagement in those, having a specialist in a remote city, being present and able to intervene if required, even if, it's at a slight delay, is something that I think you may see in the more near future as some of the longer term kind of questions around how to make it happen and make it a reality are addressed with technology evolution over time. I don't know.
Yeah, one topic that isn't really talked about that I think is important is liability. If you're a surgeon sitting in New York and you're operating on someone in, I don't know, pick Louisiana, because you're really good at that one thing, and then there's a complication with what jurisdiction are you in? And I think there's some non-technical hurdles, because in many ways the field of surgical robotics came out of telesurgery. That was the first funding for our field was from DARPA, Rex Satava, and creating systems that could be on the battlefield where you had the soldier at the front lines and the surgeon was back from there and be able to operate remotely. So from a technology point of view, that's not the hurdle, right? It's more the workflow, as Eric was talking about, and the logistics and the security and the latency, things like that. That's where I think I totally agree with what you said, Eric, that the proctoring, the advising piece of it could be very powerful, especially with new tools like augmented reality and some of these other imaging modalities that are coming. But it's also another aspect, switching topics, I guess, but it's important to me, is the usability of surgical robotics. That's an area I don't hear a lot about either, that I feel is very important. Is a surgical robot is an equal part robot and user interface. You've got 3D visualization, handheld devices. There's the OR team that's interacting with buttons and iconography and GUI screens, and how you present information, especially as we move more and more down this road of digital surgery and AI assistance. How do you present the information the right way at the right time? So,
yeah, need to make the surgeon's life easier and not more complicated, obviously. Yeah, I'm super curious actually about Medtronic's strategy for telementoring, but I don't know if that's a question for this webinar or not. Is this something you're partnering with others or looking to build in-house? But actually, instead of asking you guys that, because our time's running short, moving out to a more bird's eye or industry view, right? So there's a whole innovation ecosystem around surgical AI and around surgical robotics, right? So there's academia involved, the medtech industry, the startup world, right? Your startups today talking about these battlefield applications, for instance, for telementoring, and about countless other types of robots and AI applications and what have you. How do you think? What do you think is the best way for all these different players? I mean, you mentioned the surgical societies, right, as being those that might be able to drive some better way to access data. Any thoughts on what the best way for all these different players and types of institutions or people to interact in the most beneficial manner?
In some ways, the answer is, in my opinion, it takes a village, right? They say, I think it's going to take all of the people you just listed to truly deliver on the dream that we all have, right? And Medtronic cannot do it by itself, right? We need to partner with small startups. We need to partner with hospitals. And the surgical societies and think globally, right? So, to me, surgical robotics requires the development of an entire ecosystem of types of companies in different sectors to truly be successful. So,
yeah, and you sort of see it naturally, right? I mean, you look at the investment that's being made in a lot of these, whether it's small companies, big companies, academic institutions, hospital systems to build robotic programs. I mean, I think to that point, right? It's continued investment commitment, and I do think it's not about robots. It's about advancing the state of surgery and how safe technology, or how new technology is being applied to improve patient outcomes. And I think with that goal in mind, all of these stakeholders, whether they're large companies trying to grow their business and market share, or small companies trying to bring new technology to the market, we all sort of, in a weird way, are codependent, right? There are plenty of small companies that will be part of a portfolio in a bigger company in the future. There's there's plenty of academic research that feeds into both small and large companies, and there's so much information and collaboration going on between industry and academia, and industry and the healthcare systems around the world, that I think together we'll continue to evolve as long as we continue to make technology provide benefit to the patient and improve surgery. And fundamentally, while there's still opportunity to do that, I think you'll naturally see that collaboration grow based on where the opportunity is and where the technology growth is coming from.
Thanks. I can't agree more. So we have just a few more minutes to this webinar. I'm looking through the audience questions. Yeah, so there's some questions here around surgery, around safety, excuse me. right? So what if the AI output is not correct? Who would be liable? I think Bill touched on that. Will surgeons continue to trust automated systems if they're imperfect? Yeah, similar questions probably come up in the automotive industry as well. Any thoughts on that? And I'll just throw the second topic at you that's sort of jumping out to me here as well. AR and VR. I mean, we talked a bit about telementoring, but some questions here about do you think AR and VR per se will play an important role in robotic surgery?
Yeah, short answer is I think so. AR, VR. I think when you look at the opportunities it potentially, introduces to immerse the surgeon differently into the environment in a way that helps enhance their ability to perform surgery, I do think different applications will evolve. And sorry, to the kind of first question that you started with, just to chime in. I mean, a little bit of a rhetorical answer, but would you trust, an AI that you didn't feel confident in a car if you had to sit in that car for the next hour? I mean, I guess, I would look at all of those, and I think, there's a weird kind of legal regulatory boundary here that, at the end of the day, we are, as a medical device company, right, accountable to make sure that whatever we put on the market we feel is safe and effective. And if we can't prove beyond or we can't verify and validate that to the point where we're comfortable putting our name on it, I think you will see a lot of hesitancy. And then the other side of that is there's going to be a tough line, I think, when you look at the clinician about who is liable and who is accountable for things that happen intraoperatively. And at the end of the day, we're a medical device company today that provides tools to enable surgery, but the surgeon is the person responsible for making those clinical decisions. And I think when you get too close to that line, it starts to become a little bit of a legal and a regulatory challenge for both sides, And I think at the end of the day, you'll see some of that technology get to the point where it's providing guidance, but ultimately, I still struggle to see how we cross that bridge between, the surgeon not being the final decision maker. And I do think that will be, a very tough discussion in the future on a lot of these technologies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess for now, right, it's the same story, right? So as creators and providers of tools, the onus is on us or on the medical device industry to convince the surgeons that they can trust these tools, because in the end, the surgeon is the one that needs to be convinced that this is a reliable tool, because they're going to be they hold the ultimate responsibility for their patients. So we really will always need to prove ourselves to them first and foremost. Okay. So thank you guys so much, and yeah, thanks Bill for joining also as well. This was a pleasant. Yeah, and yeah, thanks again to the audience for all your questions. Unfortunately, I don't have time here to share all of them, but this has really been a great discussion. Yeah, so everybody have a great rest of your day, whatever you're up to in our industry or in adjacent industries, or just people who are curious and tuned in. And thank you very much again, Eric Tailor and Bill Piney of Medtronic. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys, bye.